Ah, now I think it's starting. It's just the tedious moment up front where we make sure it's working, make sure we don't miss anything. Okay, we are live, Diane. Yay.
Lovely.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. This is going live on the Ripples of Light Facebook page, and there will be a replay available if you are not able to watch it live. Although I do hope you can watch it live and give Diane some questions, because we love questions here, right? So I should say I'm Helen Nibbs with Ripples of Light, and I am very glad that we're kicking off the Death Summit today with Diane Holliday from Brighton in the south of the UK. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
And Diane is a grief, or I really should say, after speaking with her, that she is a life specialist. She's how to live your life specialist. And I just was introduced to Diane actually earlier this week. We were on a marketing call together. And when Diane heard what I was doing, she was like, hey, I have to be a part of this. I really want to be a part of this. So I was just so grateful she reached out, because I had tried unsuccessfully to get a grief specialist on this summit. So Diane was literally plopped in my lap by the angels, if you will. I'm very sure she was. So let me tell you a little bit about Diane, and she's going to tell you some more about herself too. So Diane has been working for decades with working with people in all different forms. And from her bio, which I have linked on the Death Summit page, and I'll put it again in there in a moment, but she did reflexology and Reiki, which we have that in common, because that's how I got started too. But she has just spent so many years working with people, working with their journeys, helping them along the way. And unfortunately, because of her own experience, she's become an expert in grief. And so really her mission here today is to walk alongside you, and to help you to understand the waves of it, because I always see grief like an ocean. You know, you think you're doing okay, the sea may be calm for a minute, and then you get knocked under by the undertow or a big wave smacking you in the head. So so it goes, isn't it? So Diane's going to be telling us so much more about that. And as I said, we welcome questions. You can share part of your grief journey with us. You can tell us where you're struggling. And yes, so I'm going to let Diane dig in. Oh, piddly heck, I forgot to record it. I knew I'd forget something. So let me just do that. Sorry about that, Diane.
Right.
Okay, so the recording is going to miss all that fabulous intro, but we'll put it in the notes. I am so sorry, but at least we didn't miss the meat
You actually did.
of this. I know this is the trouble with being the first speaker of the day, Diane. I'm like, oh, not quite in the flow yet, but we're with it
Never
now.
mind. Never mind.
We're
Okay.
with it. So Diane, I'm going to let you take it from here and start to tell us about your journey and what you do. So thank you.
Well, I started a spiritual journey quite early on in life. I was in my late 20s, and I'd been ill in hospital, and I had an out-of-body experience, and I'm thinking, this is strange. What's going on here? Nobody told me about this. So I researched it, looked into it, and then I found so much more information, like you do when you dig, you find it. And eventually, because I was ill, I decided to mend myself, and I studied nutrition first, one of the big things, nutrition and allergy, because I was suffering from severe allergies at the time. So I was quite young, and that was a long time ago. So then after that, I sort of diversified into Reiki and various other, alternative practices. And I was jogging along very nicely doing life coaching and nutrition and health well-being, basically, for many years. And then my husband died, and we used a funeral celebrant rather than a vicar. And she was wonderful. And I thought, I can do this, and it'll help me get over the grief, because his death was I knew he was dying, but it was still a shock. It always is. Even when you know that person is leaving you, anger, grief, it all comes back. Anyway, I thought I'll use that grief. I can use this and help. I was already a life coach, so I could use it. I'd also, during this transition time of learning, I just also did EFT, emotional freedom techniques, the tapping technique. And anybody that knows that realizes it's a very, very powerful thing. I used it on me when my husband died, and it's one of the things I will fall back to fall back on for any client. And even if they don't want to know about tapping, I'll tap on them. And it just releases it because we hold our emotions in our body. Our bodies can be sick because we have too much emotion. We can get very sick very quickly with stress, and emotion is a stress. Grief is the biggest stress you can ever have. And I think personally, I think we should all understand grief and be a lot more compassionate to people who are grieving. Recently, I had a friend she's working with me because she's a widow, and she came for her session and she was in bits. And I said, "Oh dear, what's gone wrong?" She said, "My dog's dying. Just been told my dog's got cancer." And that was the trigger that pushed her into another form of grief. It was her husband's dog. She's been meticulously looking after it and loving it since he died. And now the dog will go. So we had a lot of talking, a lot of anger, a lot of grief. Fortunately, she already understands EFTs, doing that as well. So that's what I'm.
I know we kind of talked the other day, Diane, and we were talking. We had a little chat, pre-chat, if you will, the other day, and we were talking about the difference that there can be between grieving people and grieving animals. And and I worked in a veterinary hospital, and it was an emergency situation, emergency hospital, and of course, things don't often end well in that situation, and the people grieve so strongly for their animals because it's unconditional love. You get that unconditional love from animals, and with people it's just difficult, even if you love that person and they love you, it's just bloody difficult, isn't it? So there's so many different forms of grief, and there's so many ways, like you were saying about the body, the way that it can manifest in the body, and that we can hold on to that, or can experience it in different ways.
Particularly, the difference between an animal dying and a husband or a partner or a best friend or dying is that you've had longer with them than you will with an animal. Normally, the animals, and less elephants, they're going to go within a few years of you having them, and you lavish all your attention on them like you would a child, and then they die of old age. If they get run over, that's terrible, but they die of an illness, that's awful. But most animals will just die of old age. But it's a lot quicker than a person. So you're not ready for it. When I had dogs, I've had dogs all my life. And certain dogs, I know how long they're going to live. 10-ish, that sort of thing. Except my terrier that went to 19. But I was brokenhearted because there again, he was my husband's dog. And it was almost as bad as losing my husband again.
Right.
Well, it was the link.
And it can be that way with people. And I've seen, in my work, sometimes it's the things that we associate with people that we have a hard time letting go, or that we hold on to. Working as a medium, I've had more than once someone come through from the other side going, "You can sell the truck. You don't have to hold on to it," because people are holding on to their loved one's vehicle going, I so strongly associate that with them, or they loved their car so much, I feel like they'd come back and haunt me if I sold their car. And I'm like, no, they're good. They're okay now. They can let go, and so can you. It's okay. Have a think about it.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that one. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Yes. So okay, so I've got some questions, and please do type in on the page what your questions are too, because it's probably something I haven't thought of. So Diane, big question to start with. What are the most common misconceptions about grief? that you encounter? What surprises people about it?
That it doesn't go away.
Mm.
I mean, we learn to live with it. We never really get over it. Apart from the odd people that are completely joyful about losing somebody or something because they weren't very happy. But most people who were happy with that person in their life or that animal in their life, the pain is bad and it doesn't go away. It changes. And I don't think people are aware of that. That's why you mentioned earlier about what might trigger. You know, you've got a nice calm sea, something triggers it, and up come the waves again, and it's overwhelming. So overwhelm is the biggest thing. You don't expect it. You think, oh, it's 6 months. I should be over it. No, no.
Right. And I think it can be just you know, an outside event or a comment that you didn't think of that can really just be like, oh, okay, I need a moment. I need a moment with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just the different forms of grieving, because you know, I think there's one form of grief, if you will, for like if you lose a grandparent, because it's like, sounds bad, but it's like when you lose an old dog, you know, you're
It's
like, they've had a long
inevitable,
life and you were kind of half expecting it. But it's
isn't
another
it?
thing that if you lose someone who is perhaps you know, on the same age level as you, or younger than you, or
Yes.
a
Yeah.
child, it's just such a different form of grief, and it can come in just different waves. Yes.
I think
So
one of the things we,
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
one of the things we should do is to encourage our children to
Mhm.
see death as normal.
Right,
You know, when you had pets, they will die, and it's good.
right,
You know, that's
right.
that's the life, that's the wheel.
Yeah.
And when you have grandparents, I think children should be included in the funerals, except
Mhm.
very tiny ones. But you know,
Yeah.
teenagers and a bit younger than that, onwards, they need to see that this is normal. Everybody goes through this. So when they have a friend or anything, you know, been to a funeral, been to several, you know, it's part of life. We shouldn't shield children from death.
Right. It is part of life. You're right. And I think that perhaps over the years we're trying to oh, I don't know, perhaps shield is the right word, like you were saying, like we're trying to protect or shield people from things where they're
Sanitize. We're
just
trying
part
to,
of life.
we're sanitizing it, aren't we?
Sanitize, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And when, I mean, okay, I don't want to talk about war zones and things because that's not what we call, I mean, I know it's awful, just I know it's awful,
Right.
but we're not talking about that at the moment. But the children that experience that will be traumatized forever. So we don't want our children, you know, in an ordinary environment, traumatized because
Mhm.
granny's died. Got to be
Right.
part of their life. They must have, it's got to be, they've got to be ready for it. Granny was old, granny was ill, you know, that sort of thing. And
Right.
not, oh God, how awful. It's I think we've lost touch with
We
the
have,
realities.
you know, and when we were just having a little chat the other day, you said something which I put on the Facebook thing, because I think this is the part that we really need to focus on when it comes to living and how we prepare. Like, you know, if your grandparents go and be like, not just the blanket statement, oh, they had a good life, you know, but it's to really focus on what they did in their life, and they really did have a good life, because I can't tell you how many funerals I've been to, and you know how many you know, the obituaries, and I'm like, and this can be someone I know, and I'm reading the obituary going, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I did not know that about this person. And maybe that's just me, maybe I need to ask more questions to people, but there's
possibly.
so much stuff that I just, you know, when I read the obituary, I'm like, I didn't know they did that, or I wish I'd have known, I would have asked them about it. um
Right.
so I think like sharing our lives more with people, and you know, letting people know I did this and it was great, you know, and so people don't just find out all the good stuff about you when they come to your funeral. but, but but yes. um
Well,
so
when I was doing the funeral celebrancy, I would go
mm,
and see a client, and we'd have a family meeting, and then out of the family meeting, I would you know, get some sort of story to put together, and they'd be
yeah,
contradicting me. No, she didn't do that. No, that never happened. No. because they never really knew. They had made assumptions.
Right. And and maybe this will change, because people do the social media now and people share a lot.
Yes.
But I feel like, like certainly with my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, there is so much that they didn't talk about. That there's so much that, I mean, and sometimes that was good and bad, but there's so much that they didn't talk about that is unknown. So when you find out things afterwards about your parents, you're like, I never knew that about them. That definitely, I can see them from a different perspective, and sometimes a more compassionate perspective from what you learn
Yes.
about someone
True.
after they pass.
Mm.
But I love the fact that you were doing the funeral celebrant stuff, and you're helping people to really to celebrate that end of life, because I think it's so important. Because one thing that I'm still seeing now, and certainly more during the pandemic, is that a lot of people were like, we're not going to have a funeral service, and we're not even going to have an end of life celebration. They died, it's kind of taken care of, that's it. But I think that really denies anyone who knew them that chance to pay their respects in a more formal way.
Absolutely. And I don't
Very
like
important.
these package funerals where they just, it's all packaged and done and you just go to the wake. No funeral. People need to grieve. It's
They
a
do.
fundamental part of life. We have to
Yeah.
grieve and we have to
Yeah.
be given that experience. I don't want a pre-planned funeral and somebody just says, oh, we'll send, we'll have a cup of tea somewhere or go for a drink. No, I want a proper funeral. I want my family to remember I've died and to have time to, say bye bye mum and bye bye granny, bye bye great granny. Yeah. So if
It's important.
it's
Yeah.
important, absolutely. Yeah. And if
It,
we
it,
don't grieve for our people, that's what I was meaning about setting the stage for the families and the younger people. We
Mhm,
need to set that stage now so that when
mhm,
it comes to our turn,
mhm.
they'll know what to do and they won't find it all gruesome and horrid and yeah, and all
And I think
Halloweeny.
right. And I think part of having that celebration, that acknowledgement of life there, is that, when you go and it's your family member or your friend, you see just how many other people their lives impacted. And that can really be a help, I think, in the grieving process, because grief is something that is grimly done so much internally and alone a lot of the time. And we don't want to spiral into that. So when you go and you see 100 people show up and you're like, wow, wow, because in my mind, that's like 100 people who actually got their butts down there that day to say it in person, who were brave enough. But there's probably 300 other people floating around somewhere who were like, I couldn't face it. I
You
couldn't
get
go.
it,
I
yeah.
couldn't get there. So just to see that there's that many people that your loved one has impacted can really help, I think, in the grieving process, going, oh, it's not just me. And also, perhaps I could reach out to one of these people afterwards and say, oh, do you remember blah, 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 blah? And then
Oh
you can share that
yes,
memory.
right. Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
shared memories, isn't it? It's the
Oh,
shared memories that keep that person alive. It's the soul journey and it keeps on going. And
yeah.
every time we talk about that person, it renews the soul.
Do you know it? I mean, it just really does. And it's those shared memories that I think, like, even sitting here, that you can think ahead and you'd be like, that, yeah, I'd want people to remember that about me, you know? Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh yes. Okay, so I've got another question for you. So how can you recognize someone if they're stuck in their grief or they're not processing it? What would you say to them to help them perhaps take that little next step forward?
Well, it's a change of mindset.
Hmm.
First of all, we have to have acceptance. We have
Hmm.
to accept the fact that we're still in grief and that person has gone.
Right.
The next step is, I suppose, gratitude for that person,
Hmm.
not, not to hold it again. I mean, I know sometimes I have widows who say, I'm really angry. Why did he leave me? The bastard. He's gone. But, if you can get over the anger bit, it's gratitude. Didn't we have a lovely life? Wasn't he great? Well, I miss his cooking. I've still got his shoes by the door. It's
Hmm.
that helps you get through it. It's seeing that you can't do anything about it. It's happened. On
Right.
acceptance. And then you're looking for the gratitude of, wow, what a lovely life. Or most of it wouldn't all be perfect, obviously. But, you know, we have ups and downs, but most of it was great. We had lovely times. We have lovely children, or we don't, whatever. But remembering the good stuff
Mm-hmm.
and then letting it go. You won't get over it, but you can let it go. So the pain is diminishing.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Oh, and a lady called Kelly has commented Diane, and she said that her first brush with death was when she was around 4 years old, and her kitten, who was called Grasshopper, was run over by a car. And she said her parents tried to shield her, but she insisted on seeing the kitten. And against her mom's wishes, her dad showed it to her. And obviously, it probably didn't look great, but she remembers feeling curious rather than traumatized.
Brilliant. Yes. So yeah, we don't need trauma to attack it. Just something's happened. You have to accept it. That cat, poor cat, is gone. I'm sure she probably had another cat at some point. But the fact that she's not forgotten it means that it was a good experience. She's not
Right,
shied away. Well
right.
done. Well done, Kelly.
Yes. And I think, perhaps sometime with parents, because I remember when I was 7, I found out a school friend had passed by accident because the neighbor told me and my parents weren't going to tell me. Um, because they were trying to shield me, but it was such a shock when I found out. I still remember it. How many years later? But so it was, because if you find out that someone your mum's pregnant, when you're little, they're excited, put your hand on the tummy, feel the baby,
Yes,
and there's
of course.
excitement about life coming, but then we try and shield them from the other end of it. And I'm like, if we treated it in a non-mysterious way, because let's face it, death's a bit mysterious. I mean, no one's got the complete handbook. I mean, I'm a medium, and I'm like, maybe know like half a page of the handbook, but that's about it. So if we treated it that way, I think perhaps it would help us all
You're
a
right.
little bit. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So what would you say is a great thing that family members or friends can do to genuinely support someone who's grieving?
Just listen, be there and listen. Don't don't talk too much. People need peace and quiet. They need to process things. And when they want to talk about it, all you've got to do is listen. Listen with intention of listening, not, oh, I'm going to say this next. Proper listen, proper listen. Sit back and just take it all in. Be the sounding board. And if somebody wants to ask a question of you, what do you think about? Just tell them, this is what I think, but you're doing a grand job. You're doing well. It's a horrid thing that's happened to you, but it happens to everybody. It's happened to
Right.
me twice because my husband died last year. My second husband died last year. So that was awful. I knew that there again. I knew it was happening. He had cancer, and we knew he was dying. But even then, after it was, and of course, it brought back the previous death.
Mhm.
So I've lost two men. Careless, I know. If you don't laugh, what do? You
Oh,
cry.
Austin, Diane, you know where they are.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh. No, and I'm so sorry about that. And
well,
yeah.
yeah, I was too, because we were having a smashing life. We were, second time round for both of us widowed, and we got on so well, and we had lovely holidays, and we had a lovely life, and I was pissed off that he went.
Right. And I think that's one thing that we should probably mention too. It's fine to be like really mad about it. That is
Yeah,
absolutely fine. And believe
absolutely.
me, they're not sitting on the other side going, why are they mad and having their feelings hurt? They're fine. You can tell them you're pissed. That's absolutely fine, in my opinion. I've told quite a few that I am, so I think they're all right. They haven't come back and haunted me yet.
Oh, good,
Um,
that's all right.
That's all
Yeah,
right. So, and Dana has said, which we may have just talked about, how do you advise people to find balance between talking too much about their departed loved one or never discussing the departed person at all? So, yeah, that's a great question. It's like
yeah,
too
absolutely.
much or not at
Yeah,
all.
I think that's awful.
Mm.
People think they're being kind by not talking about that person, when really you want to say, do you remember when? And do you remember when he said this and when we did that? Duh, 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 you know, they're good memories. They're really
Right.
good memories, and you need to talk about it. So if people choose not to talk about it, you almost need to have new friends. Find a group of people that will talk about it.
Right. And I think it's important too to talk about the loved one that you knew who's passed, and don't turn them into a saint when they've passed, because they're not. They were human, you know. So sometimes like you could just, gosh, I'm trying to think of something now. But if they did something like super annoying, and you're out somewhere, you go, oh God, do you remember when such and such used to
Yeah,
do this? Didn't it just drive us up the wall? And then you can have a good laugh about it. And I think just remembering their humanness can just be such an icebreaker
it
and
can.
lift people's hearts up a little bit.
That's
Yeah.
right. And it's often the funny anecdotes and almost a
Yes.
bit sort of the anti them and anti the deceased that make it funny because we can all laugh about them because they can't hear you.
Well, it's going to be a lot harder for them to answer back. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So what would you say? Oh, Patson, we were talking about children a minute ago, so I'll ask you this one now. How would you say the grieving process differs in children and adolescents than it does in adults?
Well, everybody's different. I mean, we all tackle everything in a different way, and there again, it depends on culture as well. You know, if you've come from a culture of church or spirituality in some shape or form, you know, Jewish, Christian, Islam, whatever, they've already got guidelines, and you would be already following the guidelines via your religion. But for the people that don't follow religion at all,
Mhm.
they're often lost because there's no pathway.
Right.
So that's why we need to start with the younger children by explaining to them about that or allowing them to understand it, just allowing them to understand it. We don't have to put a pathway in. We don't have to say we're going to church to do this or we're going to synagogue to do that. But they do need to have some sort of aligned path. This is what happens when somebody dies. Now,
Right.
a small child will accept it because mummy says, daddy says, and that's it. You know, it's not difficult. Teenagers might sort of rebel against it and think, well, I need to know why, you know. Well, it's fine. Research it. Show them how to do it. Show them how to find out.
Mhm.
And if they have got a religious background, ask them to ask their priest or rabbi or whatever, you know, for more help and guidance. They may get more from their religion than they do from their parents. But for the majority of us that don't have a religion, we have to go back to parents
Mhm.
or school teachers even.
Mhm.
And you can often, you know, teenagers might find a good teacher who talks to them nicely, you know, good friend. And that can help them understand because it's an outside influence explaining the same as you've been told, but it's another outside influence. There's no point in going online and searching what's death because that's not going to help you. But you need to know your emotional status. And the only way you're going to find out your emotional status is look inside yourself. And that's very hard for a teenager because they're not into looking inside themselves, they're looking at things and things instead. So, but if they can stop and be still and just think and
Mhm.
wait for those answers to come back, we know how that works because the answers do come back. So hence the fact people like me will guide them into that sort of space where they can hear themselves,
Mhm.
you know, feel it, feel it. Because if they don't feel the grief and they're just cross or
Mhm.
bereft, two ends of it, bereft is dreadful. Overwhelm and bereft is the painful bit. But if they're still thinking, why am I not feeling something? Or why am I over feeling it? They don't understand their feelings. And that is the problem of our current younger generations at the moment. They're not into feelings. They're into
Mhm.
doings on phones and things. So yeah, it's difficult. I've recently been talking to an 18-year-old, and I've been giving him a step-by-step approach to his grief
Mhm.
because he was almost suicidal. He lost his father and he was almost suicidal. So I've had to pull him right back to being an 18-year-old again. He doesn't have to carry the cares of the world.
Right.
But his father had died, and he seemed to think he had to then run everything, do everything, take over the role of father. And of course, he can't. So that was a step-by-step approach to bring him back into himself and to start feeling things properly, feeling them in the right order, and sleeping properly and not having to take drugs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Quite easy to step off the rails.
It is, and I think it's very true what you're saying about being afraid to feel,
Mm.
because that is something we numb ourselves to a lot of the time. Brene Brown has written about that, and she's talking about the if you were to stop a person in the street and be like, name some emotions that you feel, they might say sad, angry, happy, but it's very much almost like that kindergarten palette of emotions, so she's written about, if you can really articulate how you feel and just be like, I'm not angry. Do you know what I'm actually feeling is I'm disappointed, and so grief, you can really pare down into so many different things. You can be, and it could be that you're happy in your grief in a way because your person's not suffering anymore, because they may have just been
Yes,
suffering for such a long time. You may feel happy that they're not, and then you feel bad about feeling happy and blah, blah, blah,
that's
blah, blah.
right. Yeah,
So there's
that's the
so
guilt. That's
much.
the guilt. The guilt. And if you feel happy
Exactly.
that somebody's died, you're then covered in guilt, aren't you? How dare I feel like this? I'm not supposed to feel like this. So I feel
How do we get this
guilty.
far into it without talking about guilt? Yes, let's talk about guilt. Talk about
Oh,
guilt. Talk about guilt and grieving. Go for it.
guilt is massive. When my first husband died, I hadn't been able to look after him for the last couple of years because he had dementia and he was in a home. And yet I promised him I would look after him. So the guilt was bad. He then died and we had a snowstorm, so I couldn't get there in time. Guilt, added to guilt, added to guilt. Took ages to get over the guilt. Tap, 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 tap. Guilt. I just couldn't get over it. So I understand this totally. So when anybody says to me, I feel guilty because my partner, husband, whatever, has died of cancer and I was pleased to see him go, then the guilt comes back. No, we mustn't feel guilty. It isn't up to us to feel guilty. That person has chosen to die, really. The soul's chosen to move on, and we have to just allow it. But the guilt itself does stick with you for quite a while. It with me, about a year. And yet I thought I knew how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I've got better, I've got better at it. But guilt is a big thing. And there again, even though I feel guilty, I can release this tension in my body. I can let it go because guilt's only going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
Another of these little problems that hits the body, makes us sick, makes us ill. Yeah, grief and guilt, and they're horrid, both of them. But guilt is really tough, really tough.
It is. And how do you advise people after they've been through, you know, through a grieving experience? How do you help them get back on track and like live and enjoy life again? How do you even tell them that such a thing is possible? Because when someone is in that stage of grief, they're like, it's darkness. I don't know how I'm going to find my way again. And then, maybe a couple of months later they find themselves laughing at something and then they're like, oh, I can't believe I just laughed. So how do you advise people? How do you help them get back on track with life?
Well, a lot of it is just time.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, it takes longer. Obviously, we're all different. But I try and make people see that there is still good. I mean, the sun comes up every morning. You see the moon, not every night, but most times you'll see. Life is moving on all the time. I try and get people to take exercise. Because physical exercise helps to move the adrenaline in the body. And when we're in grief, we're packing adrenaline into our heart muscle, and because we're broken hearted.
Mm-hmm.
So that heart muscle is breaking, and anybody that's had real grief would know exactly what I mean. You feel physical pain. So to get away from the physical pain, we do physical work, physical exercise, do stuff, make yourself do things. and meet people who don't actually know you terribly well. So you don't have to keep talking about it if you don't choose to. So you can have a laugh, and people say, "Oh, you just buried your husband." Yeah, yeah, it's fine. No, it doesn't go like that. Sorry, that was a joke. But I mean, I do make jokes a lot. I make people laugh because we have to laugh. I mean, the worst thing on the spectrum, you've got grief at the very bottom. At the very top, you've got. So it's very nice to know that you can find joy again. In the middle is okay, acceptance, happiness, but we can find joy. But we have to wait until we're ready to find joy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
does that answer it?
it does. And just letting people know that there will be that light at the end of the tunnel. But there's no 10-step program to get there, and there's no time frame to get there. You know, they may get there sooner than others, and it may be like 1 step forward, 1.5 steps back, but you know, it's
Mm,
okay. Dana has said grief often begins when people are dealing with a long-term illness, which is true as well.
that's right. Absolutely. When you're watching somebody die, is that
Yes.
what he means, do you think?
Yes, probably so. You know,
Yeah.
it's almost like you're pre-grieving, if you will,
Yeah.
because you're just like, I know this shoe's gonna drop. It's just one. Um,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And then
Um,
the last days of somebody's life, you
yes,
almost feel as if they should have gone yesterday and they're still there.
right.
And you're waiting to actually say goodbye. And I think that's hard. That is hard.
It
Yeah.
is.
Mm.
Have you noticed, you know, what kind of impact have you noticed that grief has on someone's sense of purpose, or perhaps their spirituality, or how it changes the way that they move through life from that point
Oh,
forward?
yes. Yes. Well,
Hmm.
if the person has died and you're angry, you often find that your belief system will change. Whether you had a belief system in the first place, it will change because this shouldn't happen to me. And the person's died, not you, but you think this shouldn't happen to me. Excuse me. Yeah. But my belief system wasn't rocked too much, but I work with people that it is. God didn't do this. I mean, why did God do this to me? You know, why did God take away my person when I'm a good person? Why did he take it? You know, that sort of thing. But the beliefs that they shift definitely. And because even though I'm a sort of spiritually minded, I don't preach it because not everybody wants to understand that. So I would look to see where their base religion is, if they've got one, and work from there. And if you believe in God, well, then you've got to ask for help. You know, nothing's been done purposefully. I think the worst is if somebody's committed suicide. I think that's one of the terrible things because there again, it's why, and you blame yourself. It's it's always my fault. But it's really got nothing to do with the person left behind.
Hmm.
And that's hard to separate, particularly if you've been a couple for a long time, or you've lived with your parents for a long time, your parents die. Um, that closeness, you're losing a bit of yourself, a big chunk of yourself, actually. And you've got to fill that void with self love. And that's hard.
It is hard, and I think, you know, I think you're certainly missing that your loved one, but you're also missing the role that they played in your life. Um, as a lady I know, I'm kind of makes me think of her in particular when I'm thinking of this. Her father's passed, and of course she misses her father. I don't mean to not say that, but I think what she really struggles with the most is that he was such a protective figure and such a very wise figure in her life, that she's really missing that role
Mm.
in her life. And so now she's struggling to take on the responsibility in her own life of making her own decisions, because she'd always, like, I mean, I think she knew what she needed to do in any given moment, but she'd always defer and ask her dad. But now she's having to take that role in her life, and a real learning curve.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Yeah.
it is. Um, oh, okay. Let me see what else we can ask. Oh, do you find grieving the grieving journey is different between different cultures and religions? Do you find they have perhaps different strengths and weaknesses there?
Yes, well, definitely. I mean, if it's a very strong religion, um, they offer, I wouldn't be included because they don't need a coach. They don't need a mentor. They don't need someone to help them grieve because they've got the community around them. And those communities are very good at holding up that person while they're grieving. And that's what I mean about traditions. The old traditions were very good for grieving because you had your community, you had your group, your tribe, and you were supported. Since we've all split away from most of the main religions, those of us without religion, we have to find our own tribe. And this is where going into a group, uh, I'm in a widows group. We just go to lunch once a month and we were natter, and we all have the same thing in common. We're all widowed. And it's that sort of thing that helps because we don't have any other formal way of doing it. It's finding your tribe again. In a way, the old religions were very good at holding people up and supporting you when you went through the bad times. Well, what you must know that. You know, it's one of those features of the fact that we don't have formalized religion for everybody now. I mean, I'm actually against formal religion, but it has its place, you know. And if you haven't got a family group very close to you that holds you and helps you through, your religion would, and your religious group.
Right. It's the groups we form. And when you were saying that, it made me think of when you see geese flying in a V formation. Um, I read this and I hope it's true because I love it. But they said that the lead goose at the head of the V breaks the wind for all the other geese flying in the V formation. So it takes the brunt of it. And if you watch them flying, they will switch out that lead goose fairly often
They do.
because they're like, okay, you can do it for a while, but then we're going to switch you out. And so when you're talking about having those people in that support network, I think perhaps we all need to think of ourselves as geese, and just be like, maybe some days I'm the lead goose, but maybe sometimes I need someone else to be that lead goose for me. Um,
Right. Yeah. I
you
love that.
know,
And
I can just now see a range of grief, of grief things. Be the lead goose. I think we could market this, Diane. But sometimes you want to be that lead goose for you, and it's okay to be way back in the V and be like, someone else is going to have to fly for me today.
exactly, exactly. I think that analogy is
Um,
wonderful. Yeah. The
it
formation,
is.
but it's a bit like the wolves as well, a pack of wolves.
Yeah.
Um, the the lead wolf will always change, make sure that there's always a senior wolf at the back, picking up the strays and the elderly, helping them along. We've lost all that. Nowadays, you're elderly, you're going to home and you're left alone. It's sort of you're done. The old pack and the old religions wouldn't do that. So we've changed, and a lot of it's been good, but there's an awful lot we're missing. And a lot of this is the community that holds us together. Communities, I'm a tribe, community and small tribes are really what we're after. And it's finding your tribe, and it will change because quite often, particularly if you're a lone woman, say,
Mhm.
like me, you're not necessarily welcome with couples.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
I know.
Yes.
Well, particularly when
Um,
I was a lot younger, when my first husband died, I was definitely not welcome because I was still quite young and attractive, and I could see my girlfriends going, "She can't come for dinner because my husband fancies her." Wouldn't happen now. It did then, and I thought, this is ridiculous. This is me being taken out of my group of people just because I am now a lone woman. I don't think it's as bad now. That was 20 years ago. Things have changed a lot.
I don't know. Yeah. So,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
And
And half the
I
time,
think the
look at
same
someone
thing happens
else's.
with men as well. A lone
Yeah,
man isn't
mm,
always welcome.
right.
You know, almost like a predator. I
Mm,
don't know why. I think we've all become a little bit selfish, you know. It's all about me, 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 not about us, us, us. And we have to go back to, I mean, it's still taking me a while not to say we have got a new balcony chair. We have got, because I'm still a we, even though I'm on my own now. It takes a while, takes a while.
right.
Yeah,
It does.
it
Okay, so
does.
Diane, if you've got one parting like nugget of wisdom that you could share with everyone about grief, whether they're grieving themselves or that they know it's coming, what would you want them to know the most?
Know that it will get better. Just
Mm,
know it will get better. When you're ready, it will get better. Not when somebody else says, snap out of it. You should be over it now. No, you take your time, get over it when you're ready, but know that it will get better and you will have a proper life again and you will have fun. You will be able to dress up and go out. You will be able to do everything you've ever done and everything you ever wanted. And you can have a holiday and you can buy a new car, whatever. There's nothing stopping you living, because if you think you're going to stop living, you too will die.
mm, that's so true.
Live your life. Live it. Live it.
Yes. So true. So true. Living life, we just have to keep doing it.
We
Or
do.
start
We
doing
do.
it, actually, I think in some
Well,
cases.
yes.
Um, yeah, yes. Because if nothing else, grief and death remind us that we need to actually be living while we're here. Um,
And
it,
it's very trite to say to people, live in the now, because I'm sorry, if you're grieving, you're not living in the now. You're living in last week or last month. And for some people, last year, because you haven't got through that transition stage. But once you can get through the transition stage with help of somebody or a friend or whoever's going to listen to you, then you've got to think, right, take myself in hand. I will live my life, live it
yeah,
properly,
yes.
and help
Diane, thank you.
everybody as well. Help everybody.
Yes. Yes, help everyone. Just a kind word can go such a long way. And do you know one thing? And I think, especially if you've known someone who's been kind of like not that great of a person in life, but they've still got loved ones, you can say to them, you can still say, I'm sorry they passed. Or you can still say, tell me one thing about your loved one that you
Mm,
love, that you miss. Because even if they were just not the best person, then there's still always that one thing. And I've come across that a few times before too, and I think that's so important.
yeah.
Yeah, because everyone has some kind of redeeming quality
Oh
somewhere.
Lord, yes, yes. Even though there are some people who have been difficult people to live with or difficult in their lives, but we look for the best when somebody's gone. We don't bring back all the nasty stuff. We look for the best in what they've done. Find something of importance they've done and dwell on that, because that helps the grieving as well.
Huge,
Mm,
huge. Diane, I
mm.
cannot thank you enough for being here with us this morning and for talking to us about this in such a very warm and compassionate way. I've got your contact details on the website, and I will post them again before the end of the day, so that I really hope that people reach out to you and that you can help them individually with their journey, because and this may not have been something that someone even knew was available to them. And
No,
so I hope this has opened their eyes to let them know if that they are struggling, or that they know someone who is, that there is someone who can help walk them through this process and get them back to, or maybe just get them to where they're enjoying life and living life again. And I know that you are the girl to do it. So I want to just say thank you so much for being here with us, Diane.
well,
And
thank
I'm
you
gonna
for inviting me, Helen. Thank you very much indeed. And I hope everybody has enjoyed listening to this. And thank you for the questions, people that put questions out. That's kind.
okay. Okay, well, I will hit the end now.